I want you to understand something before I begin. I am not a soldier. I have never been a soldier. I am a logistics clerk. I count crates. I update inventory lists. I make sure that the correct number of ration packs end up on the correct shelf in the correct cargo bay. That is my entire contribution to the Dominion Armada, and I have always been perfectly happy with it. So when they dragged me into the mobilization hall aboard the flagship Teeth of Supremacy and told me I was going to be part of a planetary invasion force, I did what any reasonable person would do. I panicked quietly and hoped someone would notice the mistake. Nobody noticed the mistake. The hall was enormous. Tens of thousands of conscripts from a dozen different vassal species stood shoulder to shoulder, or shoulder to thorax, or shoulder to whatever the Brulil have instead of shoulders. My bunkmate Tog stood beside me, towering over the crowd like a gentle mountain. Tog is Brulil. They are built like walking boulders, covered in thick gray hide, with arms that could bend starship plating. Tog is also afraid of sudden loud noises, cries when he sees small animals, and once apologized to a chair after bumping into it. He is my best friend. Krivax, he whispered, which for a Brule is still loud enough to rattle your teeth. Do you know which planet we are invading? No idea, I said. Probably some rock with no atmosphere, and a few frightened creatures hiding underground. You know how these campaigns go. He nodded, but he did not look comforted. The overhead displays flickered on. A holographic star map appeared, rotating slowly, and then zoomed in on a small yellow star at the edge of the Orion Spur. A planet appeared, blue and green, and wrapped in white clouds. It was, I must admit, quite beautiful. A label blinked beneath it in Dominion Standard. SOL3. Local designation, Earth. I did not understand what happened next. The hall went silent. Not the normal silence of people waiting for orders. A different silence. The kind of silence that happens when every single person in a room simultaneously forgets how to breathe. And then, like a wave breaking against a cliff, the screaming started. Veterans were tearing off their rank insignia. A Chellic sergeant with 3 prosthetic limbs shoved past me, heading for the exit, and grabbed my collar as he passed. He looked me dead in the eyes with his one remaining organic eye and said a single word, "Run." I did not run, because the doors were already sealed. But I wanted to. I very badly wanted to. Over the next several hours I learned why. It started with whispers. Fragments of information passed between veterans who had seen the classified files, the buried reports, the threat assessments that the Dracor High Command had deliberately hidden from the conscript ranks. A picture began to form, and it was not a pleasant picture. Humans, I learned, are persistence predators. Most species in the galaxy hunt by ambush or by overwhelming speed. Humans do neither. They simply follow. They pick a target and they walk after it. Not quickly. They do not need to be quick. They just never stop. They walk and walk and walk, across plains and through forests and over mountains, until their prey collapses from sheer exhaustion. Then they catch up. I found this deeply unsettling, but it got worse. Humans, it turns out, can heal from broken bones. Their skeletal structure is not rigid and permanent like ours. It repairs itself. They can lose significant portions of their internal organs and continue functioning. They consume chemical compounds that would be classified as low-grade toxins by any reasonable medical authority, and they call these compounds spices, and add them to their food for enjoyment. And then there was their history. Humans have been waging organized conflict against each other for over 10,000 standard cycles. Not small disagreements. Not territorial disputes between neighboring tribes. Full-scale, industrialized, mechanized campaigns involving millions of individuals. They invented nuclear fission, one of the most elegant discoveries in physics, and their very first thought was to turn it into a weapon. They used it, on themselves, twice. And then they built thousands more, and pointed them at each other as a form of negotiation. They call this strategy mutually assured destruction, and they consider it a successful peacekeeping method. I sat on the floor of the barracks with my back against the wall and tried to process this information. Tog sat beside me, his massive hands folded in his lap, looking like someone who had just been told the universe was scheduled for cancellation. Maybe the files are exaggerated, he said hopefully. The Dominion sent a scouting party 40 cycles ago, said a voice from the corner. It belonged to Dren, a half-blind Chelik demolitions technician who had survived 4 prior campaigns and had the scars to prove it. 12 operatives, cloaked, state-of-the-art stealth technology. The humans detected them with radio equipment that we would consider primitive. They tracked them through frozen mountains for 6 days and captured the last 3 alive. What happened to the rescue team? Tog asked. There was no rescue team, Dren said. Command buried the file and pretended it never happened. A small group of us found each other in the lower decks over the following days. Not a rebellion. We were far too frightened for rebellion. Just a handful of conscripts who had collectively decided that we would rather take our chances with desertion than with Earth. There was me, and Tog and Dren. There was Scylla, a Valassian signals officer who could slice into Dominion communication channels. And there was Ixo. Ixo was a Krivli, tiny, insectoid, with 6 delicate limbs and compound eyes that reflected light like gemstones. Ixo was a translator who spoke 11 languages, which was impressive enough. But Ixo also spoke a 12th language, one learned from intercepted Earth broadcasts over many patient cycles of study. Ixo spoke English. Our plan was simple. When the fleet entered Earth's system, Scylla would disable our transport's navigation. We would drift into deep space. Desertion. The penalty was severe, but as Dren observed with characteristic cheerfulness, the Drakkar will punish us by the book. The humans will do something creative, and I do not want to find out what creative means to a species that weaponized the atom for fun. The plan failed. Dominion overseers detected the sabotage before we could execute it. They locked down the transport, separated us into drop pods, and launched us toward Earth's surface as part of the first wave. I will never forget re-entry. Through the tiny viewport of my drop pod, I watched the Dominion's opening barrage light up the upper atmosphere. Standard procedure: orbital bombardment to soften the target. Except the target was not softening. The target was responding. Lines of white smoke rose from the planet's surface, climbing impossibly high, and the Dominion's forward screening ships began taking hits. The humans were firing back with chemical propellant projectile weapons. Crude, ancient by galactic standards, and absolutely effective. Then the sky turned white. The humans were detonating their own warheads in the upper atmosphere, creating electromagnetic pulses that fried Dominion electronics. They were destroying their own sky to deny it to us. I want you to sit with that for a moment. They damaged their own atmosphere as a defensive tactic, and considered it an acceptable cost. My pod hit the ground hard. Half my unit was injured or in shock. Our instruments were dead. The air smelled like burning metal, and something organic I could not identify. And somewhere in the distance, rising over the flat terrain and the tall golden grasses, there was a sound. It was rhythmic, deep. It pulsed like a heartbeat, but layered with high-pitched wailing and a kind of aggressive energy that made my skin prickle. My translation implant could not process it. It was not speech. It was not a weapon. I learned later that it was called music. Specifically, a genre called heavy metal. The humans were broadcasting it from ground vehicles as they drove toward us, toward the alien invasion force. They were playing music as they advanced, for motivation. The next 2 days were a blur of confusion and fear. My unit scattered. We were not engaged by an organized military response. That would have been almost manageable. Instead, we were met by what appeared to be the entire population of the region, armed with whatever they could find, and operating with no centralized command structure whatsoever. I saw a human farmer disable a Dominion scout walker using agricultural chemicals rigged to a crude timing mechanism. I saw a group of young humans, not yet fully grown, climb a Dominion communications relay and dismantle it with hand tools while laughing. They were having fun. I saw a single human with a sharpened farming tool hold a position against 3 Chelik shock troopers and refuse to give a single step of ground. Every species in the galaxy has a survival instinct. When faced with overwhelming odds, you run, you hide, you surrender. It is logical. It is sensible. Humans do not do this. Humans see overwhelming odds and apparently interpret them as a personal challenge. When my group was finally cornered in an abandoned structure, out of options and out of hope, it was tiny Ixo who stepped forward. The little translator walked out into the open on 6 trembling legs, raised all limbs in what the intercepted broadcasts had indicated was a gesture of non-hostility, and spoke. "We surrender, please." Ixo's English was halting, buzzing with the natural harmonics of Krivly vocal anatomy. We are also scared. The humans approaching us stopped. There were 6 of them. They carried weapons that looked heavy and well used. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then one of them, a female shorter than the others, carrying a projectile weapon nearly as long as she was tall, lowered her barrel. She looked at us. She looked at Tog, bleeding from a gash on his arm. She looked at me, shaking so badly my 4 hands were blurred. She looked at Dren, half-blind and exhausted. She looked at Ixo, tiny and trembling. She said something. Ixo translated, and the disbelief in Ixo's voice was almost comical. She says we look like we need a sandwich. I did not know what a sandwich was, but I started crying anyway. They took us prisoner, but it was not like any captivity I had ever heard of. They treated our injuries. They gave us food, carefully tested to make sure it would not harm our biology. They gave us blankets when we shivered. They asked us questions, firmly but without cruelty, and Ixo translated everything with growing amazement. The same species that was systematically dismantling the Dominion invasion force sat across a table from my wounded bunkmate and offered him a warm cup of something called tea. Tog held the tiny cup in his massive hands, looked down at the pale brown liquid, and then looked up at the human who had given it to him with an expression of pure, bewildered gratitude. The invasion lasted 11 days. The Dominion committed 300 warships and 2 million ground troops. It was not enough. Not even close. Within hours of first contact, humans were studying captured Dominion technology. Within days, they were turning it against us. A human institution called MIT published a free, open analysis of Dominion faster-than-light navigation principles, along with suggested improvements. They improved our technology, while we were still trying to use it against them. On day 9, the Dracor High Commander ordered a full retreat. On day 11, the last Dominion ship limped out of Earth's system. The humans followed. Not to attack. They followed because they wanted to see where we came from. They wanted to know what was out there. A gray-haired human official addressed the planet on a global broadcast. Ixo translated for us, sitting in a warm room, wrapped in human blankets, eating human food. "We did not start this," the official said, "but we are grateful, because now we know we are not alone, and we are coming to say hello. I have been on Earth for 6 months now. I chose to stay. So did Tog, and Dren, and Ixo. I work in a university library in a city called Edinburgh. The humans here speak a version of English that even Ixo finds challenging. But they are kind. They ask me about the stars. They bring me pastries and teach me the names of local birds. Tog has become something of a celebrity in the neighborhood. Children climb on him like a living playground, and he could not be happier. I am writing this account as a message to every species in the galaxy. A warning, a guide, and perhaps a love letter. Do not threaten Earth. Do not invade Earth. Do not, under any circumstances, harm a human's dog. But if you come in peace, if you approach with open hands, they will invite you inside. They will feed you. They will teach you their music. They will name a star after you, and then argue about how to pronounce it. They are the most terrifying species I have ever encountered. They are also the kindest. The Dominion learned what humans do to their enemies. I have had the privilege of learning what they do for their friends. If you are reading this, I hope you are wise enough to choose the latter.